Hello, you're listening to Collections in the Spotlight, an occasional series of podcasts from the Warwickshire County Record Office. Each episode will be introducing you to one of the archive collections we hold at our building in Priory Park in Warwick, and explore the treasures it contains with the help of a special guest who knows the material better than most. Today we are talking about the Warwick Castle collection with a local historian who's been researching the lives of its inhabitants through the many documents they left behind. The archive of Warwick Castle spans almost 1,000 years of history and often records its creators in the vanguard of local, national and even global events. We should add that at the time of recording, in autumn 2020, COVID-19 restrictions were in force, and so this interview took place via a well-known online meeting app. We did our best, but please bear with us if the sound quality varies during this episode.
My name's Aaron Manning. I'm a local historian studying the history of Warwick Castle and its earls. And that kind of study is really with the intention, hopefully one day, of publishing a book that explores the history, a narrative history of the castle, its owners, its family, and the people who lived and worked there. And of course, then this collection is pretty essential to revealing all of those secrets and stories.
And has this collection contributed specifically any gems to that research?
It has. As you can probably guess, it's pretty impossible to tell a story of Warwick Castle without this collection, and in particular the collection being the most kind of complete set of documents relating to the history of the castle and the Earls of Warwick is really essential for revealing, for me, the personal and private lives of the people who lived and worked there, complete with household accounts, letters, private papers, estate finances, photographs, vouchers, all the things that help paint a really vivid picture of the Earls and their family, kind of hidden within this collection.
And these are primary sources, aren't they? So this kind of information is not available anywhere else. This is the fount of all information, this particular collection.
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of primary documents within the collection just have been handled and written by the people that they relate to, and so it's impossible to find the information in such detail anywhere else.
And what have you found most interesting or unique about this collection?
Yeah, I think what I find so particularly interesting about these collections is that I've been studying the Warwick Castle collection for about 8 years now, and it still has this ability to continue to kind of shock or excite and allow for almost constant discovery. I think it's a collection that hasn't been, in my opinion, it's a collection that's been really underexplored. Having arrived at the Records Office many, many years ago, but what seems to be in complete disarray when it left the castle. And so with only kind of real partial cataloguing, it's a real gem for archivists and researchers like myself to continue to dig into boxes that are completely full of letters and papers, seemingly just kind of handed over by the family. And there's so many stories and hidden documents and individual items that even now can completely change your opinion about these very famous earls and the castle generally.
And so you've been visiting the Record Office recently to look at some of the accounts in particular. Can you tell us a bit more about this aspect of your research and what do these accounts tell us?
Sure. So I've been looking through and transcribing the household and private accounts of the Greville family from around 1640 to 1740 during the last 6 months. And it's really important research for me, particularly because this is a kind of period that is so often neglected in the kind of castle story, and it's kind of really brushed over in a lot of the historical narratives that relate to the castle and the family. And through these household accounts, because they're so impeccably detailed and meticulous in their recording, they really detail almost to the minutiae of what the family were buying, where they were travelling, who they were meeting, architectural work at the castle as well as other places, and the kind of furniture, paintings and possessions that they're buying. And so they really help kind of tell a or they really help paint a really vivid picture about the individuals, the Lords Brooks and their family and their tastes and their interests. You almost feel like you're kind of getting to know them really when you're kind of going through. And I think one thing that I find particularly interesting looking at these accounts is not just kind of what they're spending money on, but also how they're paying for a lot of their work and their lifestyle. So, for example, recently going through the accounts in the 1690s and 1700s, we can see that the fifth Lord Brooke is growing steadily rich and is able to spend a lot more money on possessions and furnishings for the castle through massive investments into companies like the East India Company or the Royal Africa Company. And of course, in the current climate, it's research like this into this collection is able to really reveal and highlight these really important aspects of the story that it's important to understand, I think, when analysing the history of the castle.
Really interesting stuff. We're hoping that this collection will be part of the Institute of Historical Research's History Day. And the theme for this year is New Worlds. So can you think of a way that the Warwick Castle collection shows the Earls breaking new ground or pioneering new approaches?
Yeah, I think the Warwick Castle collection for me, I think really demonstrates that, throughout particularly the kind of 16th through to the early 20th century, that the Earls of Warwick and the Greville family in particular, like a lot of aristocratic families, were really at the forefront of new ideas of taste and interest and cultural and technological advancements, whether that's the advent of electricity within housing, which they were one of the kind of first aristocratic families to explore that, construction and taste in architecture, through their accounts, looking at the foods they're buying, the possessions they're buying, their kind of patronage of artists and musicians. And I think the collection, for me, really helps to chart, I think, the rise of global trade. I think that's the one thing that I've kind of picked out quite frequently. So that, through the castle accounts and private letters, you can see that the Earls and the Greville family in particular are really at the forefront of the connection between the old world and the new world in terms of the import of different foodstuffs and household goods and possessions. So, for example, the inventories in the early 17th century showed, the scale of Persian and Islamic art that was pouring into England, and the castle holding one of the kind of great collections. Or in the late 17th century, you can see some of the earliest references to the purchasing of orange trees and planting them in gardens, of buying and tasting tea and coffee and chocolates, drinks. They're being purchased in enormous quantities. So I think what the collection shows is that the Greville family and the Earls of Warwick then were really at the kind of forefront of this kind of connectivity between England and the new worlds from the kind of early 1600s onwards.
And for you, which item or aspect of the record sums up the Warwick Castle collection?
I think if I was to pick an item or a set of items that probably best sums up this ability of the collection to really paint a vivid personal picture of the individuals, I'd have to say it's probably a collection of letters that were written and catalogued, or not catalogued, were written and collected during the 1920s, written between members of the Earl of Warwick's family and their friends. And I found it particularly emotional transcribing, because the set of letters that were written at the time where the sixth Earl of Warwick was very ill. He was struggling with alcoholism, violence, possibly caused by shell shock and other illnesses. And so there's this incredible collection of about 100 letters that provide an almost unrivaled access, I think, into the kind of very personal and emotional lives of not only him, but his wife, his children, his servants, his mother, and his friends, as they're kind of discussing and exploring his kind of emotional experience. And there's one letter in particular that I found particularly evocative. It was written by his mother, Daisy, the famous Countess of Warwick, to her daughter-in-law, the then, current Countess of Warwick, where she describes this scene where she went to visit her son at his home in Mill Street. And she describes a scene of walking into the house and being surrounded by kind of broken whiskey bottles, a mistress that was half bloodied on the floor, smashed ornaments. And she describes this moment where her son, the Earl of Warwick, kind of crawls along the floor to her feet, and he's sobbing and he's crying, "Mummy." It's that kind of really powerful stuff which survives in the castle collection. I think that they're so important. And I think that's, as I said, I think that's what I think is a great example of what this castle collection gives you, is a real insight in detail from multiple perspectives of these very personal, private lives of this aristocratic family.
I'm open mouthed. I'm astonished at the level of detail. It's just you practically, like you say, get to know them.
Absolutely.
And I don't know whether it's a sort of a similar question, but we wondered about your most gratifying find, and that might be personal or professional.
I think the most recent gratifying find that came this year came when I was transcribing the account books through the 1710s and 1720s, and in these accounts I found payments for board wage and doctor bills for two individuals, and their names are recorded as Caesar the Black and Pompey the Black, and of course by their names being references to the Roman generals and obviously being called the Black, this was really strongly indicate that these are payments for two individuals of African origin. And I think because these two individuals receive board wage and doctor's visits, but they're not actually recorded as ever receiving an actual wage, I think what this suggests for me then is that there's a reference here to potentially two African slaves being employed or being working in the Warwick Castle household rather than servants. And they appear in accounts for about 4 years. There's records of Caesar after 2 years actually dying of smallpox, so he's buried, and then Pompey just disappears from the record after 4 years, so presumably died as well, although there's no reference to that particular slave, probably a man being buried either. So of course, considering everything that's happened this year and the kind of spotlight that's being put on the kind of links between historic houses and aristocrats and colonialism, I think this kind of find for me, I think really helps us rewrite this story of the family, and of course Warwick Castle, where they potentially kind of lived and worked. And for so long the family has often been perceived as not having any involvement financially in the slave trade, not having any connections really to plantations and slave ownership. And I think what this find kind of really kind of challenges that narrative and probably rewrites our kind of understanding of the makeup of the Warwick household and the relationship between the family and its servants, and of course the wider world and what's going on at this kind of really important period. So I think finding that, I think, has been really gratifying and it's completely changed my idea and understanding of Warwick Castle and its earls.
Is there anything we haven't asked that should be shared, or that any additional information that you might be able to pass on?
I think I think what is important to mention about the Warwick Castle collection is that it's a collection that really spans almost the whole breadth of Warwick Castle's history. So you've got documents that pertain to the early 11th century, the foundations of the castle and the relationship between the earls and the town, all the way through to almost the 1950s, where the family kind of struggling to hold on and maintain a role within the town, and of course financially maintain that castle as well. So it's a great collection in that it doesn't just span a single family, although obviously the last 400 years by its very nature are very heavily documented, but it's a collection that whatever period of Warwick Castle or Britain's history you're interested in, whether it's from the Anglo-Norman through to the very modern, the castle collection, I think you can find something there for you, because it really is a collection that covers such a wide scope of time.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Good to speak to you. See you soon. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you so much to Aaron for taking the time to share his knowledge of and enthusiasm for the Warwick Castle archive, and for introducing us to some of its more intriguing characters. But this body of records is so huge we need more than one podcast to explore it. And so join us for the next episode when we will be discussing, among other things, how the archive can help to trace the history of art at Warwick Castle. Bye for now.